There's a story from the Sirah, the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about the Battle of Badr. It's just a small footnote to the battle, really. It's just an exchange between Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Hubab ibn al-Mundhir in the run-up to the battle. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam selected a certain location for the Muslims to set up their base camp, and Hubab asked if this location was selected by divine revelation or if it was just chosen by the Prophet based on his own opinion. Rasulullah said it was just his idea, it was his own personal idea, his opinion. So Hubab suggested a different location, a more strategic location, which would see the Muslims set their camp up next to the active well of Badr, which would give the Muslims access to the water and deny access to the water for the Quraysh. Okay, this was a decisive change. It's fair to say that this decision actually changed the course of history. It was a decisive move in the battle. There's more lessons that you can draw from this incident than I can even list, to be honest. And maybe I'll actually try to do a kind of a series of talks just exploring some of the things that I think we can learn from it. Because as with any event in the Sirah, you can unfold a tremendous amount of knowledge and guidance if you just really think about it, really look into it deeply. But maybe the starting point here is to just talk about how important the starting point is, where you start from, where you begin, where you set up your base camp, what vantage point you come from. This was crucial at Badr, and it is a crucial fundamental principle in any sort of engagement, in any sort of interaction, in any sort of course, in any conflict or any confrontation that you might be in. Where you set up your base camp will be decisive in determining how well that engagement goes, how successful that interaction will be, and whether you enter that conflict or that confrontation from an advantageous position or a disadvantageous position. Now, I'm talking about this in terms of an intellectual engagement or an intellectual conflict. If you're operating from a base that's already compromised, that's in a compromised position intellectually, then you'll fail. And I think that too many of us are doing just that when we engage with the West. We enter into our engagements, our interactions with the West from an intellectual base that in and of itself represents surrendered territory. In other words, we're not actually even selecting our own location for our base camp intellectually, but rather we, from the beginning, allow them to decide where our base camp will be. And that means that, for example, when we get into discussions or debates about, say, Western liberalism or democracy or capitalism or what have you, we start from a base of accepting that any of these things are truly Western values and that they truly exist in the West. And then we argue against them like they're even real when they're not real. So in fact, we've already conceded crucial ground. We've already given them actually the victory that they want, which is just to affirm that the West is liberal, that the West is democratic, and so on, and that capitalism is what they say it is. They want us to affirm that they are what they say they are. And that means that we've already lost the battle, because the whole battle is nothing but a battle between truth and falsehood. So when we affirm that their false claims are factual, well, we've already lost. We've already let the truth down, and we've not performed our duty. Now, if we're going to deal with the West, it cannot be from within their own paradigms. We have to approach them from the position of objective truth, unbiased truth. We have to rise above their paradigms and above their propaganda and set up our base camp on higher ground to where we can look down at all the facts from an elevated position of intellectual autonomy and detached objective judgment. So, for example, you should always start by rejecting whatever they claim about themselves, claim about their so-called civilization, because they have been able to get away with everyone going along with their claims for far too long, to where they have never even had to prove anything about what they claim. They've never had to prove anything because no one ever asks for any proof. They just say something like it's a fact, and then we deal with it like it's a fact. which means that you've already lost that argument, because all they're really trying to do is to establish that their claims are facts, and you just help them do it. So take any claim that they make. For example, capitalism has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. You hear that all the time. Well, don't treat that as a fact. There's so many things in that claim that need to be challenged, and need to be corrected. If you start doing this with all of their claims, well, I think that you'll find very quickly that they're pathological liars. I mean, first, let's break down so-called capitalism. What is it anyway? Because trade and transactions and markets have existed from time immemorial. Adam Smith didn't invent markets. He didn't invent trade, but they act like the West invented trade under the philosophy of capitalism. Obviously, this is incredibly misleading, because let's not confuse trade, which has existed in every society. Let's not confuse that with the economic machine that we know today as capitalism. Trading goods and services, even across continents, was once about mutual exchange, about meeting real needs in a society and strengthening communities. But capitalism isn't just organized trade. It's a system that converts everything, resources, labor, even human dignity, into commodities for profit. It's a form of economic control that reshapes society around one simple rule: maximize gains for those at the top, regardless of the cost. Capitalism operates on a set of values that distort what trade was ever intended to be. I mean, this will sound bizarre to Westerners, but profit was only one aspect of trade at some point. Trade was also about community. It was about relationships. I mean, when people back in the day used to exchange goods, they weren't just swapping items. They were strengthening the ties that held their communities together. They were building trust, forging alliances, nurturing kinship. Every transaction was a testament to the social fabric that weaved those peoples and those societies and those communities together. Not to mention the cultural exchange that flowed through trade routes. I mean, the Silk Road wasn't just a path for silk. It was a highway of ideas, a bridge between the East and the West, where cultures met, where they mingled, where they flourished. In many societies, trade was grounded in the principle of giving and receiving. It was an expression of mutual respect. It wasn't predatory in nature. It wasn't parasitic. It wasn't mercenary. Okay, well, all of this has been cast aside in capitalism. This system doesn't empower communities. It preys on them, and it keeps them dependent. It turns workers into a resource to be exploited, just like any other raw material. It implants the idea of inadequacy in people so that they will try to validate themselves and their own worth through consumerism. And no one cares anymore about whether a product is even worthwhile or not, if it even has any quality standard whatsoever. The only thing that matters is getting people to buy it. Make your profit at any cost. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you make your profit by overcharging for goods or by underpaying for labor. It doesn't matter. You can cut corners. You can cut salaries. You can price gouge. You can sell faulty merchandise. You can even sell dangerous merchandise, poisonous merchandise. Who cares? All that matters is the money. And how this impacts society, well, that's irrelevant. And you know, they say that capitalism is about competition, and that competition is important because it drives innovation. But let's look at what that really means. Competition in this context doesn't create opportunity. It pits people against each other in a rigged game where only the wealthiest corporations win. That means they're trying to eliminate opportunities. And as soon as someone manages to dominate a market, well, they shut down all the competition, don't they? I mean, it's no accident that capitalism leads to monopolies, to economic empires that control entire industries and wield disproportionate political power. It's engineered that way. And also, I mean, who told you that people cannot innovate when they come together and cooperate? Why do you think that innovation can only ever come through rivalry and competition? I mean, there's so much wrong with this thinking. And there's so much that is distinct to the experience and background of Western Europeans who developed over the centuries this very predatory mindset. But everybody isn't like that. There actually are people in the world who survive and who thrive and innovate as communities through camaraderie, through solidarity, through cooperation. This is a thing that can happen. And they want us to believe that capitalism brings freedom and opportunity. But this system operates on compulsion. When you're commodified, when your time, when your skills, and even your privacy are bought and sold, how are you free? When the basic necessities of life are conditional upon your ability to generate profit for someone else, where's the choice in that? You're compelled. What capitalism has actually done is expand poverty, widen inequality, and create a permanent underclass to fuel its endless demand for growth. They redefine poverty to cover up the damage that they're doing, and then they point to the rising GDP as proof that everyone benefits. But that's just sleight of hand. Capitalism's success story is about growth, not well-being. In truth, the system only thrives by keeping the masses dependent on low wages, high debt, and unsustainable jobs. This isn't just about economics, it's about control. Capitalism didn't lift anyone from poverty, it created new forms of poverty, a kind of poverty that locks people into a cycle of survival rather than empowerment. So let's not mistake trade and mutual exchange, which have existed in every culture, for the exploitative machinery of capitalism that we know today. That's turned every basic human need into billion-dollar industries. In fact, the whole system is built around creating needs, creating problems, creating deficiencies, even creating illnesses. Because that's doing nothing but create markets for their so-called solutions and remedies that they want to sell you. It's absolutely ruthless. So we have to address that sort of a narrative about capitalism, that it supposedly lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and brought a better quality of life to the whole world, to all people in the world. This claim is one of the most common defenses of capitalism. And as you might expect, it is deliberately a misdirection. I mean, even if we concede, just for the sake of argument, if we concede that capitalism has saved hundreds of millions of people from poverty, which is actually something that they've only started to say recently because they want to give capitalism credit for what China has done, for how many people China has lifted out of poverty. They want to give the credit for that to capitalism. So even if we concede that, it's nothing but a deflection from the literal billions of victims of capitalism. Because capitalism was a driving force in colonization, in slavery, modern slavery, famine, ecological disaster, deadly working conditions, on and on. So, for example, European colonization is estimated to have caused 50 million deaths. Just British colonialist rule in India killed 1.8 billion Indians. Capitalist-driven wars have resulted in 160 million deaths. Upwards of 20 million Africans died in the transatlantic slave trade. This is all from the impact of capitalism. Take credit for that too. And that's just in the history. That's just in the past. But if you're talking about today, well, at least 8 million people die every year because they can't afford medicine. That's capitalism. About 9 million people die every year because they can't afford food. Half of those are children under the age of 5. Well, that's capitalism. 3 million people die every year because of unsafe working conditions. That's capitalism. So that's about 20 million people per year, or about 500 million, half a billion people since the year 2000. And that's just talking specifically about deaths. We're not talking about general suffering, because if we talk about that, well, there's at least 50 million people living in conditions of modern slavery right now. Around 15 million people are forcibly displaced for large economic projects, development, and so on every year. That's capitalism. 1 billion people are living in extreme poverty right now. That's extreme poverty. That means it's below the official World Bank poverty threshold of $2 a day. So if you make $3 a day, that doesn't include you. 854 million people are undernourished today because food prices are too high. That's capitalism. Over 2 billion people lack access to essential medicines due to high costs. That's capitalism. I mean, I could go on. All of this is directly or indirectly causally connected to Western capitalism. And like I said, the World Bank set the international poverty line at around $2 a day, and anyone earning anything above that is technically considered to have been lifted out of poverty. So yes, if you make just $2.50 per day, capitalism has rescued you. I mean, by this metric, even people who can barely afford the basics are considered non-poor. It's a deliberately low standard designed to make the numbers look better. It doesn't reflect any meaningful improvement in their lives. It simply changes the way that poverty is measured, just to try to make capitalism look like it's doing more than it is and helping more than it is. You eliminate poverty by redefining it as not poverty. So if people are working under horrendous conditions in sweatshops, living in overcrowded slums, breathing polluted air, drinking unsafe water, and barely surviving paycheck to paycheck, they should thank capitalism for uplifting them. No, you brought them into the system as low-cost labor and gave them just enough to survive because the system needs them as workers and consumers. It's a setup that ensures a constant supply of cheap labor while maintaining the illusion of prosperity. And not to mention, let's talk about the so-called improvements of quality of life. Yes, we have more technology, we have more access to information, we have more goods and more services and so on, but at what cost? The environment is being decimated, communities are being displaced for corporate interests, traditional ways of life are being erased, the pursuit of profit has brought short-term gains, but we're paying for it with rising inequality, instability, and a planet suffering ecological disaster. Capitalism creates a race to the bottom, where corporations cut costs, exploit labor, and deplete resources, all to keep their profits up. So what does this improvement mean if it's not sustainable, if it's undermining the future for the generations to come? They say that capitalism creates opportunities and social mobility, upward mobility. But look around you. Wealth is becoming concentrated more than ever before. Billionaires and multinational corporations are hoarding resources, vital resources, manipulating economies, avoiding any accountability. The so-called free market is anything but free. It's dominated by a few massive players who pull the strings and rig the game in their favor. So for the majority, the system is designed to keep them where they are, on the treadmill, just trying to make ends meet, while a small elite reaps all the rewards. Where's the opportunity in a system like that? I mean, do you know that 93% of people in America who are born in the lowest 20% of the economy will never get any higher in their life? If we really want to talk about lifting people out of poverty and improving quality of life, then we need to start looking beyond this model. We need an economic system that isn't just about maximizing profit, but about meeting human needs, about protecting the environment and creating real opportunities for people. Capitalism's record is one of exploitation, environmental destruction, and deepening inequality. Now, if I'm criticizing capitalism, they'll say I'm a communist, or I'm a Marxist, or I'm a socialist, as if the only thing that anyone can ever be is one of their ideologies. It's like if you go to a clothing shop, and they show you one suit, and you say you don't like that suit, and they'll show you another one. They'll say, well, you must want this other suit then. They think that you have to like something that they're selling. Never mind the fact that you're in there, you came in there wearing a suit. You know, I just came in here to see if you had anything better. I just came in here to see if you had something that might be nicer than what I have. I don't have to choose one or the other of what you've got. I can just stick with what I have. And being against Western capitalism does not mean being against trade. It doesn't mean being against private property and markets and so on. No, that's the trick that they try to pull. You know, like if you don't like the way they make a dish, it means you don't like the dish. No, I just don't like the way you make it. I don't like your recipe. You're a terrible cook. When you make the food, you put razor blades and cyanide in it. That's not how I prefer my meal. Like if you don't like McDonald's, then it means you don't like hamburgers, when what McDonald's makes barely qualifies as a hamburger. It's the same thing. The same way, trade and markets in Western capitalism barely qualify as trade and markets. It's a feudal system. It's serfdom. It's oligarchy. It's predation. We don't have to choose between the available Western ideologies, the available Western approaches. As I say, trade and markets and exchange have always existed. Economies have always existed. And we have had our own way of approaching those things. We start with what Islam teaches about wealth, about resources, and about the marketplace. Islam doesn't reject private ownership. It doesn't demonize profit or trade. But there's a fundamental difference between Islam's approach to economics and the capitalist model. In Islam, wealth is seen as a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't have an absolute right to do whatever you wish with your property if it harms others or undermines the welfare of the community. And in the same way, you don't have an absolute right to earn that wealth in any way that you want if it harms the community. This isn't some abstract concept for us. It's a concrete reminder that our wealth comes with responsibility. In a true Islamic market, there's a balance, a middle ground, where the rights of individuals to own, to trade, and to profit are intact, but they're regulated by principles that prevent exploitation, hoarding, and monopolistic practices. For example, hoarding essential goods to drive up prices is explicitly prohibited in Islam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explicitly forbade monopolistic practices and exploitation because these undermine the natural flow of resources to those who need them. In an Islamic economy, the role of the state isn't to dictate or centralize control, but to enforce ethical standards in the market, preventing exploitation and ensuring that wealth doesn't accumulate solely among the elite, but rather circulates. The role of the market is to operate freely within moral boundaries, where businesses compete not only on the basis of profit, but on how well they can serve the community. This isn't socialism or capitalism. It's a middle way. It's a balance that prioritizes justice over greed, community over monopoly, and service over selfishness. This is the middle nation approach, a model where trade and ownership serve a higher purpose, rooted in accountability both to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to society. See, the West gets free markets wrong the same way that they get freedom wrong. In Islam, no one individually is free to act immorally in the public sphere, because people have a right to live in a society where their values are not being assaulted. Whereas you say that everyone has a right to act any kind of way in public. They can say whatever they want to say in public, behave in all kinds of immoral and indecent ways, all in the name of personal liberty. Never mind how much tension, how much misery, how much division, how much animosity that creates in your society. Or you will let a fringe group of people oppress the general public by violating the values and the morals of the majority, all in the name of freedom. To you, freedom means freedom from responsibility, freedom from accountability, freedom from morality, freedom from decency. And then you apply this same understanding to the business sector and to so-called free markets. Well, that's not our way. Now, I'm not going to get into what an Islamic economic model looks like. That's a topic for another time. But the point here is, always set up your base camp on your own territory and don't take them at their word about anything. Scrutinize it, analyze it from a vantage point that does not already concede ground to them, because we're doing that too much. You're not liberal, you're not democratic, you're not free, you don't have a healthy economic system, you don't have a healthy political system, you don't have a healthy society. You've done everything wrong, and there's no reason whatsoever why anyone should be scared to tell you so.